forget the decision. Forget where the World Cup's going. I defy anybody to watch FIFA in action yesterday and not be utterly revolted.
This is a clip from the latest episode of the Game Football podcast from The Times. To listen to the full show, go to wherever you get your podcasts. We have to start with the worst kept secret in football. The 2034 Men's World Cup will be held in Saudi Arabia. FIFA confirmed at their extraordinary Congress on Wednesday, their title, not mine. Spain, Portugal and Morocco will be joint hosts for the 2030 tournament. 3 matches in the 2030 tournament, as we've discussed on this show before, will also be held in Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay to mark the 100 years of celebration of the competition. All 211 of members of FIFA nations were represented at the meeting over a video link. Very modern, I thought. Very modern. We've got some chortling in the studio already. Gianni Northcroft throwing his head back. What are you like?
Oh, no, just, it made it easy for our own FA and others just to acquiesce, didn't it?
Yes, well, quite. And that's why I wanted to start and why we have to start with this, because, as I say, not surprising news. It's the worst kept secret. We all knew it. And Martin Samuel, this is exactly your intro. Well, they did it. We knew they were going to do it, so we cannot claim to be surprised. But the headline of your comment piece, Saudi 2034 World Cup, an outrage and a sham that they could have stopped.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. They could stop it. That's the great myth with all of this sort of stuff, that they're these powerless stooges just sat there and all they can do is applaud, like, seals, basically, with whatever FIFA do, because there's about 5 countries that if they just turn around and said, no, we're not doing this, we're not participating in this, that's the World Cup done. And the precedent for that is when UEFA attempted to reintroduce Russia into age group football in 2023, and FIFA took that as the signal that they could then put them back in the World Cup qualifying groups. And in 2023, about 5 or 6 countries said, of which England was one, that they wouldn't play Russia if drawn against them. And England were the only, for want of a better phrase, major nation that said this. They weren't joined by Germany or France or Italy or Spain or any of them. They were joined by Poland. They were joined by the Baltic states and Sweden and Ukraine, obviously. And the upshot of that was UEFA had to withdraw because they couldn't run the risk of Russia qualifying by default and then other countries at the tournament itself, at the UEFA age group finals tournaments themselves, saying, well, we're not playing Russia, and destroying the entire competition. So it can be done. And that's always been my point. And so this, it's not just that it's in Saudi Arabia. People get it wrong if they think it's just about it being in Saudi Arabia, although I have my issues with that. It's about the absolute lack of a process, the lack of a challenger, the lack of a proper bidding process, where Saudi Arabia knew what the deal was and nobody else knew what the deal was, so they couldn't get a bid package together in time. It's Infantino, who I think in one of the most crowded fields in modern sport, which is most negative influence on sport in history, in an administration sense, is by far and away the worst I've ever known. By far and away the worst I've ever known. And it's him having the audacity to keep lecturing on things like sustainability when you've put a World Cup across 3 continents and 6 countries, to lecture on human rights when he's taken it to Saudi Arabia, where we know what the human rights situation is. So anyway, that's what the piece is about.
Why do you, how, because you're right, this, I remember when I was growing up and it would be a big thing about where's a World Cup going, where's a Euros going, where's an Olympics going, and, there's lots of lots of countries in the hat, and who's going to get, and the envelope was a genuine moment. Like, Johnny, how or Martin, how have we got to this point where it's just this kind of where everyone knows beforehand?
Well, they've made it so all of these things have become so big and so expensive that it's very limiting to host it. That's one of the reasons why the Olympics, no one wants to host the Olympics, it costs a fortune. And you see when Norway, I think it was Oslo, did the world a favour and released the book of the IOC's demands for, the host city for an Olympics and what you had to do and what you had to give up.
Johnny, I want to bring you in to talk about, Martin's raised lots of excellent points there, but just your reaction generally. I say reaction because we, as I say at the top, we knew this was coming, but your thoughts both about what Martin said and now that this is out in the public domain.
Well, I mean, my reaction is part of the problem. It's absolute weariness and despondency, and I think that is one of the things that Infantino and FIFA play on. They've worn us down over the years. Martin's absolutely right. These things can be stopped. Super League showed that things can be stopped. But Super League was stopped because of the energy of football supporters and because of the energy of the public outcry. The public don't raise a protest when FIFA do these things because we've all been ground down. Headline news, FIFA make shady decision. Nobody's surprised. So there's no groundswell of protest, and that's how they profit. That's how they keep doing this. And what we've now got is this guy, this sort of oily former lawyer who kind of manages things by process and can subtly maneuver the machinery because he's very good at what he does. To present us with fait accompli, like he has done with this World Cup. I mean, maybe we'll go. There's the question about Saudi and all that represents, and I think that is very, very complex because, again, as Martin says in his column, there's a whole bigger dimension to that, not just sports relationship, but our own government's relationship, for example. There's politics. Geopolitics. But just keeping it to football for the moment, I think I think we're seeing a stealthy power grab here by Infantino and FIFA. That's been bankrolled by Saudi Arabia, and I think we've got to be very careful of it because he's kind of presented us with this Club World Cup, which is already going to take a month of next summer, and it's going to impinge on our clubs. And I say our clubs, I don't just mean British clubs, I mean all of our clubs as football supporters. It's going to impinge on the club game, and you've got El Khalifa, the PSG chief, earlier this week, saying, well, the league should get on with it. They should be like Ligue 1 in France. We've only got 18 teams now. We've got fewer games and we've got big squads, so we're happy with the Club World Cup. And it's like a coordinated erosion of domestic leagues. Khalifa's saying that, well, the solution is just to reduce the Premier League so we can make room for these competitions that no one's asked for. Now we've got a World Cup that maybe in winter 2035, maybe in winter 2034, it's gonna play havoc with the calendar again, and there's a sense that we've just all got to kind of reorganise ourselves.
Can't even get the World Cup possibly in the year that it's meant to. Might not actually
might be Saudi Arabia 2035.
2035.
Yeah.
And as the trouble is, I do think that we love tournaments, but our lifeblood is our club game, and slowly, FIFA and UEFA with the expanded Champions League, they're inventing more competitions, they're moving their competitions around, and it's at the expense of, it's a challenge to the club game, and I think we've got to be quite clear about what's happening.
Tony, you played at World Cups, you played at international tournaments, very good, very good.
Yeah.
I said plural, World Cups. But, think about then what Johnny's saying about, the erosion of the club game as well. Do you look at that as a former player and think this is unrecognisable from, the kind of World Cups that I was going to and the time that I played? This is a completely different sport now. I'm
going to use one of my favourite words.
Yeah, go on.
Umfuzzled.
I like that.
Perplexed, confused, It's if you look what's happening in golf, and it's in the paper today about what's happening with Liv and Saudi Arabia taking a big interest. You're looking at football, you're looking at boxing, which has had similar issues. I always remember the 1990 World Cup and coming in probably the most corrupt time of Italian football during the 80s. okay, and the Italians got it in 90. Obviously, that decision was made a few years behind before. I can only talk as a player and planning them tournaments, but there's been a lot of things around FIFA over the generations and their involvement with the Middle East. And you talked about club football and FIFA.
So you're saying that even back then, it was not like,
No, it's different. It's just different, but
Right.
it was still major issues. You could tell, even in America, it was a World Cup that when you got there, and I'm sure you boys probably would have been there, no one outside the hotels really knew there was a World Cup going on.
No, they didn't.
Right.
No,
So we're not. It's not me sat here going, "Oh, it's only bad now." Back in the day in '94,
No, there's been issues.
It's been cut for a long time.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Tony to cut across there, but the thing is, Tony mentioning Live Golf. You can mention all sorts of other sports. The women's tennis, where it ends up in Saudi, etc. But all I would say is this: the women's tennis is desperate for no one wanted to give it money.
Yeah.
They tried to have that season finale in other countries. They ended up in China. They went to other countries, and in the end, they weren't getting the revenue that Saudi Arabia could provide. So I've got a degree of sympathy there. They're trying to sustain that sport. They're trying to offer prize money that is expected, and the only people putting their hands in their pocket for it are Saudi Arabia. I don't think the golfers were short of a few quid, but nonetheless, there's all sorts of other issues with that. This is football. This is the richest sport on the planet. You don't have to keep going to these places where human rights are an issue, where the treatment of construction workers are an issue. You don't have to keep going to these repressive regimes to get the money. You'll get the money elsewhere. You'll get the money in places where people are freer.
On that, I'd say as well, look, Qatar wasn't that far, it wasn't that long ago, was it?
No.
These things, the accusations were there. Lots of us went to that World Cup. I was there. These boys are definitely there also. And it went really well. But a lot of stuff is hidden from what you actually see. I mean,
football was great.
You could have, by the way, on the metro or the tube in...
Yeah.
What was it like? You could have ate your dinner off the floor on the metro. It was like everything was so immaculate. Can I just add on to one other thing that bothers me about all this is that they've dipped their toes in, obviously Saudi Arabia, into club football, but they know the biggest thing they can get is the World Cup. Okay, and they've already had it. You could say in the Emirates, or Qatar. I was amazed that some of the things that they, against their laws in their own country, is like in the Emirates at the moment, and this is obviously different from Saudi Arabia, but it's the same idea, is that they're building a casino in 2027 that is illegal in the Emirates. But they have gone after entertainment, whether that's tennis, golf, even snookers in Dubai, and I just think they're going for the very top and knowing that they can get that, and that's where FIFA fall down for me, because they've not stood in the way. Do you know what I mean? They've allowed it to happen.
We have to add in Russia as well. Russia 2018. What we can't do is be sort of negative about one area of the world and not look at what's staring us in the face, which is 2018, before Qatar, we were in a country for a World Cup that had effectively a dictatorship that was using the World Cup as soft power to try and burnish its reputation ahead of an invasion of Ukraine. That was happening. Migrant workers died constructing the stadiums in Russia. Yeah, St. Petersburg.
Wasn't South Africa not as bad, but there was still quite a lot of problems.
Massive
South Africa,
corruption.
I mean,
Massive corruption.
Corruption it was a one-party state at that point, effectively, because ANC couldn't really be challenged. Brazil, with their
basically every
politics.
World Cup.
Well, one of the points is that and World Cups and Olympics have always been used by regimes because it's a great way to burnish soft power. But it is expensive holding these tournaments. It is what you have to do to put them on, and it always seems to involve building 12 new stadiums.
And it's made more so because if you look at Cape Town has got fantastic stadiums. Cape Town has hosted incredible rugby matches and things like that. But when they had the World Cup, it was FIFA that drove the building
Yeah.
of a new stadium, so that the TV companies that were there, you've got the view of the mountains in the background. You've got the ocean, and you've got the mountains in the background, and it looked stunning. Green Point, I want to say Green Point.
That's right, Green Point,
Green Point.
yeah.
But it cost a fortune. They had stadiums in Cape Town that they could have refurbished, they could have redeveloped, but no, you've got to have a new one. You've got to have a new one. It's the same in a very small way with our European Championships and what has happened with Northern Ireland, where they were wanting to build a new stadium rather than try and make some alterations to Windsor Park and settle for a slightly smaller stadium. But you've got Windsor Park, but they didn't want to do that.
Is there a case for Saudi Arabia? In the way that, Tony, you just talked about Qatar and saying, it's actually very impressive. Is there a case for the World Cup going to Saudi Arabia?
There is, because it's what we would say a proper football country, in the sense it's got a long football history. It's even before the Saudi Pro League, it had well-supported football clubs. It had a World Cup
into World Cups
history
and
itself.
And stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
And I do see the logic of and the potential appeal of having a World Cups in every part of the globe, representing everybody. That, of course, that principle is something you could argue with that. So yeah, I mean, and I actually think there's a way the World Cup could have been hosted in Qatar and could be hosted in Saudi if FIFA are serious about human rights. Have a human right, a proper scrutiny of human rights. Have a qualification that you have to adhere to in the building of stadiums that are independently monitored. Commit to reform, commit to various charters. That could be done, but it isn't done. And one of the galling things is in again, as Martin puts in his column, in this week we've had FIFA sweep their own reporting to migrant workers in Qatar. They swept it under the carpet. And decided not to act on the recommendations for compensation.
Their own Human Rights Committee recommended, for want of a better phrase, reparations to the migrant workers that had built the Qatar World Cup. And FIFA's response was, that's not going to happen. And then this man stands up and talks about human rights.
And when did the press release come out, Martin?
11:32 p.m. UK time. I mean, it's just a scandal, and it's not about this part of the world could never have a World Cup or whatever. And funnily enough, stuff that everyone got obsessed about in Qatar or with Qatar, like you can't have a beer, I couldn't care less about that. If you're going to send it to a country in which alcohol is not allowed, have a dry World Cup. That's it. I mean, I know it's unfortunate if for people that can't watch a game of football without having a beer, but if that's the rules of the country, I've got no problem with that sort of stuff whatsoever. I have got a problem with the process. I have got a problem with this sort of one-horse race that they conducted 2 one-horse races yesterday and took an hour and 15 minutes to show everyone. They went through it as if there was a bidding process, as if there was a rival or anything like that. It was absolutely. I defy anyone. Forget the decision. Forget where the World Cup's going. I defy anybody to watch FIFA in action yesterday and not be utterly revolted, because it was everything that you look at and think, yeah, that's why Ian Waldrich, one of the great sports writers, in the end stopped covering World Cups, because he hated it so much. He hated what football had become so much. And I've been doing this a long time, and you can see yourself getting more and more to that stage of thinking, I tell you what, I can't stand these people. And I can't stand.
Did you feel that at the last World Cup?
No, look, I tell you what, Qatar's a good. See, the thing, but what always drags you back is this: the World Cup endures.
Yeah,
right?
it does.
So the World Cup is flame-proof, really. because Qatar, the actual football, it's a good tournament. Finals probably the greatest final I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So the tournament itself, the competition itself, when you get there, there's 32 countries, it endures. I feel the same about things like the Club World Cup. I think the Club World Cup has the potential, not necessarily this one, because I think the Inter Miami thing really sours it, but in future, it has the potential to be a great tournament. I've always thought that. But it's succeeding despite these people, because it's succeeding because no matter what you think of UEFA or FIFA or whatever, France versus Argentina, Lionel Messi on one side, Kylian Mbappe on the other, hammer and tongs for 2 hours or whatever. It was a fabulous game.
Was amazing. We've got loads more I want to talk about, but Johnny, just a final word from you on this, just reflecting on some of Martin's points.
Yeah, look, in an ideal world territory, we would we would have stronger domestic FAs, not just the English FA, but across Europe. I think we, the people, fans, would care a bit more, and there could be some way of actually making. Because when Blatter went, that was the chance to rebuild FIFA, and instead it's closed off even more. Martin's absolutely right that what they've got is this golden ticket. They've got this thing that just can't. It's so brilliant, the World Cup, and it is the first thing that brought me into football outside of my local team. Showed me there was this game, not just my local side, and that's going to be like that for generations. But every time they put in a World Cup, they say to us, what a great tournament it was, because it usually has been. But as Martin says, it's been a great tournament nearly always, despite FIFA, not because of them.
From that perspective, it's nearly bulletproof, the World Cup, isn't it?
You could put it on the North Pole.
Don't give them ideas.
No,
Don't give them ideas.
No, there's not enough money in it at the moment, unless they really strike oil, in which case it will be there,
Exactly.
2030. Can I just make one point?
Yes,
one point.
This is the last point.
This is the last point, but I will just make one point. We could have to do a whole show on FIFA. Because one of the things that people say is, but you'll be there. Well, you lot will all be there. Why don't you, if you feel so strongly about it? There is absolutely no point whatsoever in a journalist boycotting the World Cup and thinking that makes any difference whatsoever. The people who have the power to stop these things happening are not sitting on this podcast. I would love it if we were, but are not sitting on this podcast, and they're probably not even listening to this podcast. They're on those television screens that Infantino was looking at, and they all raised their little hands and they all clapped or whatever, and they're the people that could have stopped it. They're the ones that are in a position of power. It doesn't make any difference. Of course, a journalist will write negative things about a World Cup, about the hosting process, about lots of things around it, and then when it comes, well, you go because it's the World Cup, and you're there. The job is to report the World Cup, so you go and you report the World Cup. You probably write the same stuff while you're out there. I certainly did when I was in Qatar. But the idea that one bloke not picking his press accreditation up is going to make the slightest bit of difference is just preposterous. It's the people. Debbie Hewitt was our representative, and the FA have confirmed that Debbie Hewitt was part of the acclamation process. So Debbie Hewitt applauded. She didn't sit there flicking V signs. She didn't sit there with her feet up on the desk smoking a fag going, no, not having this, which she could have done. It would still have been waved through anyway because there were enough people applauding. One of the adjudicators was ready to start applauding before they'd even been asked. And one of the adjudicators. But they're the people. They are the people. And they're the ones that have waved it through.
Yeah.
They're to blame.
Go on, Johnny. We've got one final point. We'll talk about some actual football.
If the FA are going to wave it through, they could at least have the decency to press for the compensation of the migrant workers in Qatar.
Totally, John.
They could at least press for that.
Totally, John.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.